Good afternoon. It's April the 20th, 2006. This afternoon, Tom Bush and I are interviewing Ray Reed on his experiences in World War II. This is on behalf of the Southwest Georgia Regional Library. Ray, tell us when you joined the Navy. I believe you were in the Navy.
Yes, I was in the Navy, and I joined when I was 17 in Washington, D.C. at the old Maine Navy recruiting station on C Street in Washington, D.C. I went in because I wanted to do something for the country. I was only 17, but I'd graduated from high school, and so I waited until my birthday, which was January the 9th, and my mom and dad had signed the papers, and Dad took me on down there, and I went in the service in 1945, in January of 45, and rode the old Richmond, Frederick, and Potomac Railroad down to Williamsburg, Virginia, and went into boot camp at Camp Perry, Virginia. And that began my career.
How long did you stay there?
Well, we stayed there for only 8 weeks. The war was, I said, moving rapidly in 1945, and there had been 12 weeks of boot camp for the sailors in the early days of the war, but I went through in 8 weeks, and it was sort of on-the-job training when I got to where my next part of the Navy career was, which was out in Hawaii.
You did visit Richmond.
Oh yeah. Well, I was in an outgoing unit, and I'd been picked to go to a radio school, aviation radio school, and I was in the OGU unit, and a sort of a fight came out between some stevedores down in Richmond, and I was on SP duty that night, and they trucked us down to Richmond, and I guarded the public library, I think, down in Richmond, Virginia. I walked around it all night long and didn't see anybody, but I missed my draft to Jacksonville, Florida for aviation, aviation radio. So what I did, I got into a group known as Ready for General Sea Duty, South Pacific, and we took a troop train from Camp Perry, Virginia, and we never got off that train until we ended up in Treasure Island, California, outside of San Francisco Bay. Well, we stopped at Reno, and I think...
Did you get off at Reno? You got coffee?
We got coffee through the window. The Women's Volunteer Services and the Red Cross gave us coffee and donuts through the windows of the troop train as it was right there, stopped in dead Reno, Nevada. You could look up the street and saw the sign that said the biggest little city in the world, but we never could get off on it. But we ended up in San Francisco, Treasure Island, ready for General Sea Duty, South Pacific.
Well, where'd you go from? Did you go to sea then?
Well, yeah, we were ready to go, and got on board a troop transport, probably headed for New Caledonia staging area, somewhere like that. And the ship was a twin-propellered troop transport.
Oh, you flew out?
No, it was on AP means troop transport, and it was it was twin propellered, and it ran into some rough seas off of San Francisco when it was going through one of those currents, and one of the propellers loosened, so it limped into Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on one good propeller, and went into dry dock.
Now, was that the USS Billy Mitchell?
That's right.
All right, you told me.
Yeah, Billy Mitchell. That was the name of the troop transport.
And went in the dry dock and started chipping paint.
Well, there I was, just one of these Seaman second class raw recruits just out of boot camp, and there were a lot of us on that troop transport. And there was another little small fellow from Chicago. His nickname was Mouse Manning. And we were on the side of the troop transport chipping paint and barnacles. And that's how I got into the silent service, because I didn't remain silent. They had a PA system up on board, high above us, and it said anybody who was under 5'10" and weighed less than 165 pounds, if they wanted to volunteer for special duty, report to the fantail at 1700 hours, 5 o'clock.
Did you have any idea what you were volunteering for?
No. I said, well, let's volunteer and get off this detail. And Mouse Manning says, no, it's just the garbage detail if, they're looking for suckers. I said, we are on garbage detail, right, shipping these barnacles down. So we hauled ourselves up on the lines at 5 o'clock, and they took us off the ship. They said, your sea bags or your gear will remain on board. If you pass, we'll get it to you. Otherwise, you'll report back to the Billy Mitchell. And we went on down the gangplank, got on a small little Navy bus, and were taken over to a dispensary, a hospital dispensary in the Pearl Harbor area. And that's how, that's another story, though. We're going to get into that in a minute. But that's how I got into the silent service.
Tell them what the silent service was.
The silent service is the United States submarine forces, naval submarine forces, and both, I guess you might say, the Atlantic and the Pacific, and wherever they roam, they're known as the silent service, because a lot of what they do, they don't report until years later you find out what they did. And the people don't talk too much about it, but what I'm going to tell you is all been cleared. It's been in print, it's been in books, it's no secret. But anyway, they took us to the dispensary, and we just got down to our skivvies, and they put us into, one at a time, a captain's chair that revolved very rapidly. It had wooden arms, and you sat into it, and they revolved you in that chair 25 times to the right and stopped it very quickly, 25 times to the left and stopped it, and said, get out and walk down that white line. And they had a white line painted right down the middle of the dispensary floor. And of course, we all were dizzy, and we couldn't walk that white line. We all staggered all over it. And we all passed because they wanted people who were normal. They didn't want some nut who could walk that line. They wouldn't have taken him into the submarine force.
Well, they were needing people in the subs.
Yes, they were. And I'll tell you why they were. They were building submarines at a rapid pace, and most of the fleet-type submarines had a crew of 85 officers and men in these fleet-type S-boats, but some of them were operating with only 65 officers and men at that time. They were building them quicker than they could turn them out in New London or out of Hawaii, because they had a big submarine school in Pearl Harbor also at that time. That's where I went to. Sub school was not New London, Connecticut.
You went to the sub
in Pearl Harbor.
At Pearl Harbor.
Yes, sir.
And were you assigned your ship then?
No.
That's you called it. What do you call a sub? It wasn't a ship, it was a boat.
It's a boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a boat, and if you've been in the silent service or the submarine forces, you've been in the boats. That's what they call it. You've been in the boats. And
But you didn't have any trouble with claustrophobia?
No, they made us go through a big system of wire hoops covered with black mesh, and some had dead ends, and you could find your way through in the dark, had to feel your way, and Mouse and I made it all right. And I believe that everybody that tried that day made it. But if somebody had claustrophobia, they could have quickly separated the hoops and gotten them out of it. But that was.
Did everybody have to do that?
Yes.
Break?
I think so. Now, I didn't go through New London, but I do know that they had to pass those balance tests and claustrophobic tests, yes.
We had another fellow that went in subs, but he'd gotten off the Yorktown, he volunteered for submarine. He didn't never mention that. But I think by that was 1942.
That's early.
Yeah.
That was early.
They did wanted somebody warm. Well, what did you got on the sub, now what?
Well, no, we went through the training school right there in Pearl Harbor. And they had submarines there that were not fleet type. They had earlier type of submarines, smaller S-boats. And they training submarines. And we'd go out on them. It was on-the-job training. That's how we learned to coordinate. Everybody had 2 main jobs. Some of them had 3. But everybody had to learn their particular job and the job of the man next to you. And then in case of battle stations, there was another job that you might end up doing. So we all got to be a well-trained crew together. In other words, you have to coordinate. And then we left on a submarine from Pearl Harbor after we graduated from sub school. And I rode out to Guam on a submarine, but that was not the submarine that I was assigned to. When I got to Guam, I was assigned to the Sea Fox. And it was one of a group of a division, the submarine divisions. And then there's a wolf packs that they formed, and then there were individual forays that they'd send you out on. But we all were under the command of Admiral Nimitz and the ComSub Pac Marianas. That was the headquarters for the fleet at that time.
The war was still on.
Oh, yes.
There you go.
But I got out there at the tail end of it now. Now, I went through boot camp and I went through training there in Pearl Harbor. And by that time I got out to the South Pacific, the war was still underway, but it was, you might say, the tail end. Most everything from Pearl Harbor submarines had been moved to Guam and other areas that had been recaptured from the Japanese the year before, for instance. And although there were still some Japanese on Guam that hadn't surrendered, but actually the war had moved where we were closer to the Japanese Empire. And so that's where the main submarine forces were, and also the subtenders like the Holland and the Sperry and the Proteus and others, they were out there. There was other subs out of Brisbane and Fremantle, Australia, that were working another part of the Pacific. But we were mainly out of Guam for the Northern Pacific and the Central Pacific.
Well, did you ever go to battle station? Did you ever have?
No, actually, we trained. Yeah, we went to battle stations all the time on the ship, you know, for training, because we were green. There were a bunch of greenies like us, and then there were some experienced crew members too. But we never did go to battle stations for anything like a Japanese ship or aircraft. Never came close enough for us to have to crash dive, but we did pop up among sampans and fishing fleets for information. We always had a Japanese American on board on each side. And he would speak to the Japanese on board. At first they were terrified, from what I understand. After a while they got used to us, and they'd always toss them cigarettes and candy bars, and they'd tell you anything that you wanted to know, how the war was going in Japan. They were emaciated. They looked like concentration camp survivors, and they were so thin and starved. They had to give their entire catch, except 10% to the Japanese government. That other 10% they could either feed their family or sell it. And they knew the war was just about gone, and so they would give out information.
They would talk through the knee side.
That's correct. They would. They'd say the Third Fleet shelled part of the Japanese coast of Honshu last week and blew up a train in a tunnel, or shell. You know, but they would tell what was. They didn't hold anything back. They knew the war was over, and they didn't like the Japanese government either. These independent fishermen.
Well, where were you when the finally surrendered?
We were at sea, and we turned right around and headed back to Guam, and pulled into PD Point, Apra Harbor, and we were on standby because the first atomic bomb had been dropped, I believe, on Hiroshima about August 14th, and then they dropped one on Nagasaki. And then the war, as Truman announced it, the war was over. And then we all went to Tuman Bay. I've got some photographs right here on the table of Tuman Bay. And we partied for about a week and a half. Got pictures of that too. But anyway.
You Baptists not supposed to do that.
Well, at that time I was a Presbyterian.
As far as you knew the war, I mean, everything was down. Did y'all start standing down yourselves? Or did you maintain any type of?
Oh, that's where the interesting part of my Navy career came in after that. And I want to get into that next, because they did stand down a lot of the submarines, and a lot of the boys that had been out there for several years. They sent a lot of them back to Bremerton, or back, you know, they began to disengage most of their forces, slow but sure. But a lot of the troops had to stand by and go by on troop transports to the Philippines, because so many of those islands had been bypassed by MacArthur, and there was a whole Japanese army on the island of Cebu, 190,000 troops, including nurses and complete hospital, that had been bypassed. And they all had to be repatriated back to Japan. So it was a stand down for the enemy, and then a gradual demobilization for the armed forces.
Did you have any trouble with the Japanese surrendering?
On Guam we did, but in the Philippines, from what I understand, it was pretty smooth. But there was about 346 Japanese out on Guam that refused to surrender. They refused to believe that the emperor had done this, and they sniped the Americans out on Guam for several years after the war was over.
Well, the last one surrendered in the 80s.
Yeah, well, he was up there in the hills.
Yeah.
He kept stealing them clothes off the Guamanian people's clothes lines and blended in with the general population.
Well, you ran guns to some place in the Philippines.
Yes, we did. We did run guns to the island of Mindoro, and that's where I had this piece of gorilla money that I showed you all. The island of Mindoro was one of the bypassed islands, not to be confused with Mindanao or Leyte, but it was Mindoro. And they are very interesting people, and I'm going to tell you right now how the Silent Service got to know one of these words. The people were descended from Malay sea pirates, and they'd hunted heads until 1936 on the island, when General Douglas MacArthur's father, General Arthur MacArthur, was over in the Philippines and got them to quit being headhunters. But they called themselves Docs, D-A-K''S, and they were very small but very powerful little brown men, about 4 feet tall, and they had bows that were even taller than they were. And they were all Muslim, and their word for land was Bum, and their last name was Dak. And when you were out there in the Boondocks, you were, that's where the word comes from, the island of Mindoro, and the Dak language, Boondock, land of the docks. And if you're out there in the jungle in the land of the docks, your head's not safe. And so that's where the word boondock and boondockers came from. And we ran guns to them, and they didn't want 45s or Garans or anything else like that. That knocked them over backwards because they were just little fellows. They wanted these little small submachine guns. We called them grease guns.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we ran them a load of grease guns. And that's where I got the gorilla money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now you all...
They had all of the Japs bottled up in one garrison town on Mindoro, and the Docs owned the whole island by day and by night, and they were starving the Japanese garrison. They had them holed up there.
Well, you said they were, at first y'all were paying them, they bring in a Japanese head.
Well, that's grizzly but true. They used to pay them.
Grizzly, yeah.
They used to pay them.
That's true though?
Yes, it is absolutely true. They had put the price on the heads of these Japanese and these Filipino guerrilla fighters, especially the ones on some of the less, less inhabited islands like, Mindoro. They were just, maybe 5,000 Docs and maybe 2,000 or 3,000 Japs, but they weren't too well educated. But they would bring in the heads, and then later on it got to be a grisly mess, and so they weren't paying them.
This is really the house.
Yes, this is true. And when the submarines would come in, or sometimes American destroyers, in the bypassed islands, they would run guns to them, and they were paying them in guerrilla money, both coin and, I guess you might say, American money, paper money. And then they said, no, let's cut this out. Just bring us the teeth of the Japanese. So they bring in strings of teeth that they had holes drilled through, and they were just on a chain, and they turned them in and they get the money. And that wasn't just on the island of Mindoro, it was on the island of Panay and some of these other bypassed islands. I know this is for a fact. Yeah. It was a grizzly.
Somebody in the Navy knew this was going on up the line.
I imagine General Douglas MacArthur knew about it, and he was probably saying, go to it, boys, go to it. That's the way.
But none of them was surrendering. I mean, with the hands up.
No. There was one concentration camp on the island of Guam, which held every single Jap that had been captured in the islands prior to Okinawa. And there were less than 2,000 in that camp. And most of them had been found when they were shell-shocked or unconscious, or, only 2,000 of them in one camp. But
Where were you in the USS Seabox?
The Seabox?
Yeah.
I was a striker for a radio man, and I had another job. We would get up there and we'd stand on the shears by the periscope, and we put our binoculars on, and we wore baseball caps instead of white hats. And generally just a pair of shorts and a skinny shirt and low tennis shoes is what we wore on board on that submarine. And we'd put our binoculars up there, and
Was that when 9 were killed on that?
9 of our boys went out boondocking.
Oh, that was when they went out boondocking.
To in some of these caves to look for Japanese souvenirs. Like I found a complete Japanese rifle. I didn't bring it today. I couldn't have brought it into the library anyway. But I found a rifle and a bayonet and all that kind of stuff. But some of the other boys, this was before I had gotten out there on the Sea Fox. It had happened about 3 or 4 months before I joined the team. And they'd gone boondocking, and they ran into a bunch of Japanese who ambushed them and killed, well, there was 9 boys and 2 Guamanians, and they killed one Guamanian. He got away, and then they killed 7 of the sailors on board the ship, and a couple of them were wounded but escaped.
Now, this was on Guam? Or
It was on Guam, on Guam. After the island had been recaptured in August of 1944, there were still a lot of Japs on that island that had refused to surrender.
Yeah, you said that the last one didn't surrender until
1980s.
sometime in the 80s.
They went back a hero to Japan.
While I was up there on the island, after the war, about 126 of them committed suicide by jumping off a cliff at Oroki Peninsula, and about 175 of them came in and surrendered with a Japanese lieutenant. He handed over his samurai sword. They were in tatters, but their weapons were flawlessly clean when they all surrendered as a group.
Well, speaking of the Japanese, the Filipinos had these bows.
Yes, they
And
did.
they were big as they were,
Taller.
tall. And the guy asked you to pull it back.
That's true. The little Filipino docks are about 4 feet 2, or 4 feet 3. That's their average height, and their bows stood at least 5.5 feet. And they'd say, pull it all. We'd get on shore bringing in their supplies and armaments. They'd say, want to pull the bojo? Want to pull the bojo? Only 1 cigarette. So I'd hand them a cigarette, and I got to pull that bow back with all my might, and I got it back about 4 inches. They said, no, Joe, that's not the way you do it. Like this. They'd pull it all the way back. But we realized that they had been pulling those bows since they were able to walk.
Yeah.
They were just used to them, that's all. And they also
Was that their main weapon, or did they?
No, they had bolo knives, and they also had a little dagger called a criss, which was their holy dagger, and if they took it out of their little buffalo hide cases, they'd prick their finger and draw blood, because if they drew it, they had to draw blood. That was part of their Muslim religion of that island, and so they'd prick the finger and they'd say, here, you want to see my criss? You know, that's what they called them. In fact, this gorilla running that I have shows a Filipino sitting on a rock waiting for MacArthur to return to the Philippines. And he's got his bolo knife in a big sheath attached to his waist, and he's got his war hatchet in his hand, and he's sitting there
Back on.
waiting for MacArthur to return so he can help him.
Oh, he's waiting for Mike off.
To come back to the Philippines, but he said, in other words, he's letting us know the Philippines are in good shape. MacArthur's coming back. It's a 25-cent piece.
You went back to sea.
Yes, I did, because I had not served my 18 months in the South Pacific. And I was under a minority cruiser. When you go in at 17, you get out when you're 21. That's 4 years. But I didn't have to serve that long because they were demobilized in the Navy, and after I'd done my 18 months in the South Pacific, a few more months after that, I got out and didn't have to serve 4 years. The Navy was demobilizing. They said, do you want to get out early and go to college? And I said, I certainly do. So I got out early. But I was there on the Sea Fox and on another submarine. And after the war, and I'm going to make this public statement right now, whether you realize it or not, the Cold War started the day after the Japanese surrender. The Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States started the next day. And I was in the division. I've got some pictures here. of our hut where we lived, and got pictures of the USS Tangs, Quonset hut, which they'd been captured by the Japanese. Some of them had, and they were keeping the Quonset hut ready for the crew to come back and get
But
them.
nobody realized the war,
No,
the Cold
right.
War.
So I had gone to into a division which was called IMD department. And the IMD department stood for Informational Marine, no, Informational Navy Data. And what it was, we went out there and went around to the Sea of Japan and the South China Sea and things that had been under Japanese control for all those years, the coast of Korea. And we took soundings and we shot the sun with the azimuth and brought the maps up to date, knew where the shoals and the reefs were, and where the major rocks were, and what the sea bottom was, and what the depth was. We brought all the maps up to date. While we were doing that, other American submarines were doing that, and Coast and Geodetic Survey surface ships were out there, and we went around to a great, well, we actually, on our submarine, went to outside of Vladivostok, the Soviet Union, and took pictures of that beautiful harbor through our periscope.
Did the Russians know you were there?
No, and we didn't want them to know we were there. But we were getting informational naval data.
But did you ever see any Russian ships?
Yes, we
I
did.
mean,
Yeah. The Russians had, of course, gone to war against Japan about 3 weeks before the end of the war, just on a technicality, but we saw some Russian ships. Though while we went into Japan, we went to the port of Sasebo and also several others, and we saw some Russian ships.
you came on back in 1946.
You know, in 1947, early.
Oh, 47.
47.
And that's when you got out.
But we did a lot of cruising. We went off the coast of French Indochina and did a lot of work around the Korean coast and what later on became Vietnam. We got as far down as British Malaya and actually did a lot of work there, helping photograph coastlines. And we shared this, of course, with the rest of the world. Not all of it, but some of it.
And you got out in 47 and went back to college.
We went to college on the GI Bill with the University of Texas.
And then you found your way back in
Well,
with the help of Charlie Dowdy. And
Well, my mother was originally from Texas, a little town called Teague, and my father was from Massachusetts, but I wanted to go to school in Texas, and that's where I went to school. I was in radio, TV, early radio, TV, and Charlie Dowdy contacted me. Well, I contacted him, actually. He had a job open
down there.
in Bainbridge, right?
Oh, in Bainbridge?
And he had put it into a trade paper. There was an opening, and I sent him an early tape of my voice and got the job. Came down here on the CNL to Waycross and then the ACL into Bainbridge and got off at the old train station. 1952.
Ray, you've had a wonderful life, and on behalf of the American people, I want to thank you
Well, thank you
for what
sir.
you did.
We found some Japanese miniature subs were out there too. Not just in Pearl Harbor, but
Yeah.
out on Island of Guam. That's one of them that was captured. They put it up there.